Oh, I scored the first chapter of John, and I do promise the three of you that when I allocated these readings, I wasn't looking at who got what. So it wasn't just that I got the best reading. Um, and this is obviously a passage we could sit here and talk about all day and all day tomorrow and all the next day. So just a couple of things that have caught my fancy as I've thought and read about it. First two little points come from Malcolm Guite. Uh, and I just love this way, his way of talking about the synoptic gospels, so Matthew, Mark, and Luke, who, have a particular kind of tone in common, and then John, which feels quite different. And he describes them this way. He says, the synoptic, you have to have the idea of definition of sacrament in your mind, by the way, to get this. So if you don't know what a sacrament is, go and look up how many articles we have in the Anglican Church. The synoptic gospels give us outward and visibly what John's gospel gives us inwardly and spiritually. Don't you think that's beautiful? So in the case of the Christmas story, we get the outward and visible from Matthew and from Luke. And in this prologue, we get the inward and spiritual, but it's still talking about Jesus coming. It's still talking about the incarnation. And the other little thing I loved was the reminder that John is associated with the eagle, which is, why we have the eagle holding up the word in many of our churches. But the reason he was associated with the eagle was because it was believed that the eagle could look directly at the sun and not get blind. And in this prologue, it's the idea that John is able to look directly at the sun, directly at God, and not be blinded by it. And of course, what does he see when he looks into the heart of God? And he sees Jesus, he sees the Word. And he talks about it in, obviously, the same style that the entire Bible starts with. So in the beginning, God, in Genesis 1, in the beginning, the Word, in John 1. Two stories, both about something new being created through the power of God's Word, either through the spoken word in Genesis 1 or the Word made flesh in John 1. In both cases, it's something that has light at the center. And in both cases, something new, beautiful, good, and full of life comes into being. The first time, it's the whole universe. And this time, it's something vaster than the universe compressed into the form of a baby. And so, to me, it's just the most amazing communication of the amazingness of this story that we are celebrating at Christmas. Nothing will ever be the same after Jesus or after Genesis 1. Do you like that?
Very much. Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. I was interested, Anne, when you said, we could talk about this for the whole day and then the next day. I don't feel like that. What I feel like when I read this reading or hear it read to me, which is even better, is I can't think of anything. I just love it so much that I don't want to engage at the head level. I just want to fall on my knees. That's how I feel. The same way that I feel about the Eucharist. It's just something so perfect. I don't want to do anything else except love it.
Well, I hope I just spoiled it for you.
No.
Yeah, I mean that links in with the kind of the connection of John's gospel. It's kind of it's a sacrament of words in
Yeah,
many
it
ways.
is.
And I absolutely get that, Lisa, and I'm with you. It's I mean, it's very hard to hear this reading at the midnight mass without having tingles climbing up and down one's spine. I've never lost that awe. And then John shifts gear, and we're not going to go into that now, but you suddenly find him giving the practicalities and the inner narratives of Jesus' life, which are, incredibly holy moments. But the other thing I think which amazes me, and I suppose it is a little bit intellectual, but is the sense that John couldn't be saying this he's making a claim that there was an absolute correlation. There was no variation between God's word and God's action. This word that John uses for Jesus is word. And there is no disconnect. What God says through Jesus is what God gets and what we get. And we get the whole kit and caboodle of the salvation story. And if that didn't ring true with the earliest listeners to John's gospel, then we wouldn't still have it. But they were so clearly connected to this passage that they went, yeah, this has to be here. We need to have this amazing piece of poetry because it rings true. So I find this awe-inspiring.
Calvin?
I think for me, in the beginning was the logos, which we translate word. And because we're a literate society, we often think of a written word. But of course, this hearers back then would have thought of a spoken word. And it's not always translated word. Sometimes it's translated as thing or matter or intention. So it's a much more fluid and open-ended thing. And trying to think myself into that pre-literate mindset that it's a useful thing for me to do. But also I'm aware that this is a term that John borrowed from Greek philosophy. And that's really instructive that when he wanted to communicate these deep truths, he used the language of the people that he was speaking to, even though many Jews would have found this quite problematic back in the first century. And it's become sort of jargon for us, or, part of our own heritage. But he was doing something quite radical and revolutionary in using the language of his hearers to communicate more deeply with them.
So how do you preach on it?
With awe.
With awe, yeah. Are you radical and simply say we're not going to preach on it, we're just going to read it? Soak it up.
That's probably been my approach over the years. It's beyond my words.
Follow it with
I have preached on it. And I've preached on it by talking about the story of God starting from the beginning and the relationship with his people, and stopping in at key points and saying, but this is the next, this is a whole new direction. This is something so new. It's very difficult to preach on. It's actually very hard to read aloud as well. And I think one of the things I love most about it is the bit where he says, we have seen his face. It brings it home to you that there were people who met him, who spent time with him. It's not just a story. It's history and full of grace and truth. I mean, they're just beautiful words, aren't they? Beautiful words.
And of course, he takes that up again in the letters, doesn't he? Introducing, talking about the one whom they have touched and spoken. Then, and saying, this is so real. So,
I think there's a sense for me of, this vignette which sticks in my head always of Jesus before Pontius Pilate, and Pilate asking that cynical philosopher's question. Jesus said, "I've come to be a witness to the truth," and Pilate says, "What is truth?" And many bottles of red wine have been spilt in student flats discussing exactly that. But here, what Pilate didn't realize is that the truth was standing in front of him. That when what's at the center of all things tried to give a self-revelation to us, didn't send a set of rules or precepts or doctrines or whatever, but sent a human being, a life. The truth was a human being, and that it's we're always making this category error of thinking, what's the truth? Meaning, tell me, explain to me in logic and precepts and bullet points, which I can then respond to and refute or agree with. But we're not given that. We're given a life, somebody living amongst us.
That's beautiful.
Okay, we better stop there.